Jake Martinez wiped the grease off his hands and looked at the old Chevy engine in front of him. Another day, another repair job at his uncle's shop in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. The desert sun beat down on the garage's tin roof, making the air inside shimmer with heat. "Jake, you've got mail." His Uncle Roger's voice echoed through the workshop. "Since when do we get mail here?" Jake muttered, putting down his wrench. The repair shop's address wasn't even on Google Maps. The package sitting on his uncle's desk was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was made of a material that seemed to shift colors in the light, like oil on water. There was no postmark, no return address, just his name written in elegant flowing script that appeared to float above the surface. "Well, aren't you going to open it?" Uncle Roger asked, peering over his coffee mug. Jake carefully picked up the package. It was lighter than it looked, and warm to the touch. As soon as his fingers made contact with the seal, the package dissolved into a shower of light. A hologram materialized in the middle of the office, causing Uncle Roger to spill his coffee. The image showed an elderly man in what looked like a mixture of a business suit and ceremonial robes, his gray hair neatly combed back. "Hello, Jake," the hologram said. "I'm your great-uncle Theodore. If you're seeing this message, it means I've passed away. I know we've never met, but I've been watching your progress with great interest." Jake's mouth fell open. He had heard stories about great-uncle Theodore, the black sheep of the family who had disappeared decades ago. His mother used to say Theodore had gone to find himself and never returned. "I'm sure you have questions," the hologram continued, "but time is short. According to Imperial Law Section 47B of the Galactic Charter, I hereby bequeath to you my most valuable possession, the legal guardianship and ownership of Lady Xatheria, fourth wife of the Galactic Emperor." Uncle Roger's coffee mug shattered on the floor. "This is not a joke, nor a mistake," Theodore's hologram said firmly. "Lady Xatheria is a remarkable being, a member of the telepathic Auroran species, and one of the most politically influential figures in the Empire. By our laws, she is now your legal responsibility." The hologram's expression grew serious. "A warning, Jake. Refusing this inheritance is punishable by death under Imperial law. Lady Xatheria will arrive within 24 hours of you receiving this message. She will not be happy about this arrangement. The Aurorans are proud, and she spent the last 2 centuries as the Emperor's wife. However, I believe you possess qualities that make you uniquely suited for this responsibility." The image flickered. "One last thing. Trust your instincts, Jake. Your mind works differently than others, and that's not a weakness. It's your greatest strength. Good luck, nephew. The fate of 2 civilizations may depend on what happens next." The hologram vanished, leaving Jake and his uncle standing in stunned silence. "So," Uncle Roger finally said, looking at the coffee spreading across the floor, "you just inherited an alien empress." "Fourth wife," Jake corrected automatically, his mind struggling to process what had happened. "I inherited the Emperor's 4th wife." He looked at his grease-stained hands and torn jeans. "And apparently, she'll be here within 24 hours. "Well," Uncle Roger said, reaching for the paper towels, "I guess we better clean up the shop." As if in response, a distant rumble shook the building, causing tools to rattle on their hooks. Through the garage door, they could see a bright light descending from the sky, heading straight for them. Jake swallowed hard. "I don't think we have time." The crystalline ship landed in the repair shop's parking lot, melting the asphalt beneath it. Jake and Uncle Roger watched from the garage as a beam of light shot down from the vessel, and a figure materialized. Lady Xatheria was not what Jake had expected. She looked almost human, except for her silver skin and hair that floated as if underwater. Her eyes glowed with an inner light, and she wore robes that seemed to be made from living starlight. "This," she said, her voice echoing in Jake's head rather than his ears, "is completely unacceptable." She swept into the garage, her robes billowing despite the lack of wind. Tools rattled on the walls, and the lights flickered as she passed. Hello," Jake managed to say. I'm Jake Martinez. I know who you are, she replied coldly. A primitive human child who somehow ended up with legal ownership of me. Theodore's final insult to the Empire, no doubt. She raised her hand, and Jake felt pressure building in his mind. Uncle Roger gasped and fell to his knees, but Jake only felt a mild headache. Cytherea's eyes widened. Impossible. Your mind. It's resistant. Before Jake could respond, the air crackled with energy. 3 figures in sleek black armor materialized in the garage, their weapons already drawn. Death to the Heir, one shouted, firing a beam of energy. Jake's years of ducking under cars came in handy. He rolled behind a workbench, pulling Uncle Roger with him. The beam hit his uncle's prized Mustang instead, turning it into a pile of smoking metal. Not the Mustang. Uncle Roger groaned. Cytherea raised her hands, and 2 of the attackers clutched their heads in agony. But the third one was wearing some kind of protective helmet. He aimed his weapon at her. Jake didn't think. He acted. Grabbing the nearest tool, a spark plug tester, he threw it at the overhead fluorescent lights. The garage plunged into darkness just as the attacker fired, their shot missing Cytherea by inches. The emergency exit, Jake shouted, remembering the door his uncle had installed after watching too many action movies. This way. He grabbed Cytherea's hand. It felt like touching cool silk, and pulled her toward the back of the garage. Uncle Roger was already there, punching in the code. You dare touch me. Cytherea began, but another explosion cut her off. Look, Jake said as they ran through the door, you can be angry about being inherited later. Right now, we need to survive. They emerged into the desert sun. Cytherea's ship was only 30 yards away, but more armored figures were appearing between them and it. Time for Plan B, Jake said, spotting his uncle's old dirt bike. Can your telepathy work on machines? Of course not. Cytherea snapped. What are you? Jake revved the bike's engine. Hold on tight, Your Majesty. This is gonna get bumpy. Before she could protest, he pulled her onto the bike. They shot forward, weaving between the attackers. Jake felt her arms wrap around his waist as he hit the dirt ramp his uncle used for testing suspensions. The bike soared through the air, straight toward the ship's entry beam. Cytherea's shocked telepathic curse rang through Jake's mind as they hit the light, and vanished. They materialized inside the ship's cockpit, the dirt bike clattering to the crystal floor. Through the view screen, they watched the repair shop explode in a ball of flame. Uncle Roger, Jake whispered. Is fine, Cytherea said, her tone slightly less icy. I teleported him to safety before we left, a courtesy for his hospitality. She turned to Jake, her glowing eyes narrowed. Now, explain to me how a human repair worker just outmaneuvered 3 Imperial assassins with nothing but a primitive combustion engine. Jake shrugged, trying to hide how badly his hands were shaking. I guess I'm full of surprises. Indeed, Cytherea said, as the ship lifted off. Perhaps that's why Theodore chose you, but don't think this means I accept this arrangement. Fair enough, Jake replied, watching his home disappear below them. But maybe we should focus on staying alive first, then worry about the inheritance thing. For the first time, Cytherea's lips curved into something almost like a smile. At least you have your priorities straight, human. The Celestial Spire was the fanciest place Jake had ever seen. The space station looked like a giant crystal needle piercing the stars, and every surface inside sparkled with precious metals. Jake felt extremely out of place in his oil-stained jeans and t-shirt. Stop fidgeting, Cytherea commanded telepathically as they walked through the grand hallway. You're supposed to be my owner. She said the last word like it tasted bad. Sorry, Jake whispered. It's just that everyone's staring at us. And they were. Alien nobles of every shape and color watched them pass, whispering behind jeweled hands and tentacles. Some looked amused, others disgusted, and a few seemed calculating. Cytherea led him to their suite, a room bigger than his uncle's entire repair shop. The walls were made of some kind of living crystal that changed colors with their mood. Lesson 1, Cytherea announced, sitting gracefully on a floating chair. Imperial politics. The emperor had 12 wives, each representing different power blocks within the empire. I was the telepathic faction's representative. Was? Jake asked, carefully sitting on what he hoped was a chair and not some alien art piece. The emperor's death changed everything. Some wives returned to their factions. Others were inherited by noble houses. And I, she gave him a pointed look, was given to a human mechanic by that troublemaker Theodore. Jake leaned forward. About Theodore, what exactly did he do? Everyone keeps acting like he was important. Cytherea waved her hand, and a hologram appeared. It showed a younger version of Theodore, wearing an Earth business suit among aliens in elaborate robes. Your great-uncle, she said, prevented a war. 20 years ago, the Empire planned to invade Earth. Theodore somehow talked the Emperor out of it. No one knows exactly what he said, but after their meeting, Earth was declared a protected world. Protected from what? Before Cytherea could answer, the room's crystal walls flashed red. A voice boomed through hidden speakers. ATTNTYON. The Imperial Council requests the presidency of Jake Martinez and Lady Wix ATHA. Already? Cytherea stood, looking worried. They're moving faster than I expected. Is that bad? The council will decide if your inheritance is valid. If they rule against us. She let the sentence hang. Death, Jake guessed. Naturally. The council chamber was a vast dome, with 13 thrones arranged in a circle. 12 were occupied by beings that looked more like forces of nature than people. The 13th throne, the Emperor's, stood empty. Jake Martinez. A voice thundered. The speaker looked like a living galaxy. You claim ownership of Lady Cytherea through inheritance. Yes. Jake said, then remembered Cytherea's lessons about confidence. He straightened his back. Yes, I do. Through my great-uncle Theodore's bequest. Theodore, another council member hissed. This one looked like a living shadow. That name brings back memories. He was either a genius or a madman, a third counselor said. Perhaps both. And now his heir stands before us. A human child who resists telepathic influence. Jake felt Cytherea stiffen beside him. He hadn't known that was unusual. There is more happening here than a simple inheritance, the galaxy beam declared. Theodore's actions always had purpose. The question is, what game was he playing? Perhaps, the shadow suggested, we should watch this situation develop. The boy might prove entertaining. Agreed, the council chorused. The inheritance is confirmed, but know this, Jake Martinez, you are now a player in the great game of imperial politics. Survive, and you may learn why Theodore chose you. Fail, and Earth pays the price. The shadow finished. As they left the chamber, Jake whispered to Cytherea, did that go well? We're alive, she replied. But they're watching us now. All of them. And Theodore has made you part of some grand plan that even I don't understand. Jake thought about his simple life fixing cars, now gone forever. Well, he said, at least it won't be boring. Cytherea's telepathic laugh echoed in his mind. Oh, human, you have no idea. Jake was lost in thought, staring out the window of their suite at the endless stars, when someone slipped a note under their door. He picked it up, surprised to feel actual paper. What is it? Cytherea asked, gliding over to him. After 2 weeks on the station, she'd become slightly less hostile, though she still acted annoyed whenever he spoke. Help us break the chains. Jake read aloud. Maintenance Level 4, Storage Room B, come alone. Cytherea snatched the paper. Absolutely not. It's obviously a trap. Maybe, Jake said. Or maybe it's from others like you, inherited spouses who want their freedom. Her silver eyes widened. What do you mean like me? Come on, Jake said, running a hand through his messy hair. You hate being treated like property. I've seen how angry you get when other nobles talk about the inheritance system. Maybe we're not the only ones who think it's wrong. Before she could respond, the station's lights flickered and died. Emergency red lighting bathed everything in a crimson glow. That's not supposed to happen, Cytherea said. Her floating hair began to thrash wildly. Something's wrong. The telepathic network. It's being blocked. The door burst open. 3 figures in maintenance uniforms rushed in, their eyes glowing an unnatural green. Mind parasites, Cytherea shouted, backing away. They're controlling the station workers. Jake ducked as one of them lunged, remembering his uncle's lessons about fighting bigger opponents. He rolled and came up holding a decorative vase, smashing it over his attacker's head. The parasites spread through telepathic contact, Cytherea explained, trying to hold back the other 2 with her powers. But something's weakening my abilities. Good thing I'm partly resistant then, Jake said. He grabbed her hand. Come on. I have an idea. They ran through the darkened corridors of the station. Everywhere, nobles and servants fought each other, many with the same glowing green eyes. Jake led them down to maintenance level 4, where he'd spent time talking to the station's engineers. You're taking us to the trap, Cytherea demanded. Trust me, Jake said, punching in the code to storage room B. Inside were spare parts and tools, things that felt familiar to Jake after years in the repair shop. The parasites are spreading through the station's telepathic network, Jake explained, grabbing tools. But what if we could overload it? Like blowing a fuse. Understanding dawned in Cytherea's eyes. The network's main relay is 3 levels down, but it's surely guarded. Jake held up a makeshift electromagnetic pulse device he'd assembled. Then we'll need a distraction. The next 10 minutes were chaos. They fought their way down, Jake's partial resistance to telepathy protecting them from the parasites, while Cytherea used what remained of her powers to clear their path. Finally, they'd reached the relay room. Now, Jake shouted, activating his device. The pulse shot through the telepathic network. Every possessed person on the station screamed, then collapsed as the parasites, overloaded by the surge, fell from their hosts. How did you know that would work? Cytherea asked later, as medical teams treated the survivors. Cars and spaceships aren't so different, Jake shrugged. They all have systems that can overload if you push them too hard. A group of nobles approached them, led by a being that looked like living crystal. We are the resistance, the crystal being said. We fight against the inheritance system. That note was from us. We wanted to test you, and you proved Theodore chose well. What do you mean? Jake asked. The crystal being smiled. Theodore was our founder, and now his Heir has saved hundreds of lives using human ingenuity and a belief in freedom. Perhaps it's time we told you what he was really planning. Finally, Arya muttered, but Jake noticed she was still holding his hand from their escape, and she didn't look angry about it anymore. The Resistance's hidden chamber looked more like a library than a rebel base. Holographic books floated between ancient scrolls, and star charts covered the walls. The crystal being, who introduced herself as first speaker Aurora, led Jake and Cytherea to a desk covered in Theodore's personal notes. Your uncle, Aurora said, discovered something that terrified the Emperor. Something about the noble bloodlines. She waved her crystalline hand, and a hologram appeared showing DNA strands. Jake didn't understand the symbols, but Cytherea gasped. The telepathic abilities are failing, she whispered. Generation by generation. They're getting weaker. Correct, Aurora nodded. Centuries of keeping the bloodlines pure has weakened them. But Theodore found a solution. She turned to Jake. Human DNA. Jake blinked. What? Your species is young, Cytherea explained, studying the charts. Your genetic diversity is incredible compared to our ancient, carefully controlled bloodlines. And you. She stared at Jake with new understanding. Your partial resistance to telepathy isn't a defect. It's an advancement. Theodore discovered that human neural patterns could stabilize and even enhance telepathic abilities, Aurora continued. But he needed to prove it. He needed someone with exactly the right genetic makeup. She pointed at Jake. He spent years searching Earth's population for the perfect candidate. Jake fell into a chair. So that's why he chose me. Because of my DNA. Not just that. A new voice said. They turned to see an elderly woman entering the chamber. She had the same silver skin as Cytherea, but her hair was cut short in a human style. "I'm Liberty," she said. "Theodore's wife." "His what?" Jake and Cytherea said together. Liberty smiled. "Yes, he married an inherited spouse too. But instead of accepting the system, we decided to change it. We founded the Resistance, gathering evidence about the failing bloodlines and searching for a solution." She walked to Jake, touching his cheek gently. "He chose you because you remind him of himself, someone who sees people, not property. The DNA compatibility was important. But your heart," she smiled. "That was the real key." The Emperor knew, Cytherea realized. That's why he refused to invade Earth. He feared humans might actually be superior in some ways. And that's why he assigned me to you, Liberty told her. He knew I was working with Theodore. He thought he was punishing me, but instead, he gave us exactly what we needed. Aurora finished. The perfect human candidate, and one of the strongest telepaths in the Empire. Together, you could prove that mixing bloodlines makes them stronger, not weaker. Jake stood up, his head spinning. "This is too much. I'm just a mechanic. I fix engines, not empires." "Sometimes," Liberty said softly. "Fixing an engine and fixing an empire require the same skills. Seeing what's broken, understanding how it should work, and not being afraid to try something new to make it better." Cytherea moved closer to Jake. "That's why you suggested helping other inherited spouses, isn't it? You instinctively saw what was wrong with the system." Jake nodded slowly. "Because treating people like property is wrong, no matter what species they are. And that," Liberty smiled, "is exactly what Theodore would have said." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. Aurora's crystal form flickered with red light. "The Council knows," she said urgently. "They've discovered our research. They're sending ships to destroy all evidence, including us." "Then we need to show everyone the truth," Jake said, surprising himself with his determination. "Before they can stop us." Cytherea took his hand. "I know how," she said. "But it's dangerous, and we'll only have one chance." Jake squeezed her hand. "Well, Uncle Roger always said the riskiest repairs are usually the most important ones." Liberty's smile widened. "Oh yes," she said. "Theodore chose very well indeed." The Imperial warships surrounded the station, their weapons charged and ready to fire. Inside the control room, Jake, Cytherea, and the Resistance members worked frantically. "The broadcast system is ready," Aurora said, her crystal form glowing with stress. "But we need a stronger telepathic signal to reach the entire Empire at once." "I can do it," Cytherea said. "But even my power isn't enough alone." Jake looked at the makeshift amplifier he built from station parts and spare equipment. "What if you used me? You said my brain patterns could enhance telepathic abilities." "That could kill you," Cytherea protested, her floating hair twisted with agitation. "The human mind isn't meant to handle that much power." "We don't have a choice," Jake said, seeing more warships appearing on the screen. "Liberty, you said Theodore chose me for my heart. Well, my heart says this is right." The station shook as the first warning shots hit their shields. "Attention rebels," a voice boomed through the station. "Surrender the human, and your DEATHs, while it'll be quick." Liberty stepped forward. I'll help too. 3 telepaths working together. It might be enough. Jake sat in the amplifier chair, trying to hide his fear as Aurora attached sensors to his head. Cytherea took his right hand, Liberty his left. "Ready?" he asked. "No," Cytherea said. Then she surprised him by leaning down and kissing his cheek. "But do it anyway." Jake flipped the switch. Pain exploded through his mind as telepathic energy surged through him. But instead of fighting it, he thought about everything he'd learned. About treating people as equals, about fixing what was broken, about making things better. He felt Cytherea and Liberty's minds join with his, their thoughts mixing with his own. Across the Empire, on every planet and ship and station, people suddenly received the broadcast. They saw the evidence of the failing bloodlines. They felt Jake's simple human conviction that people shouldn't be property. They experienced Cytherea's journey from disdain to understanding. The Imperial ships stopped firing. Through the telepathic link, Jake sensed millions of minds awakening to new possibilities. Inherited spouses rising up. Noble houses realizing the truth about their weakening powers. Common citizens seeing hope for change. "It's working," Aurora shouted. "The people are responding. The council, they're divided. Some are calling for peace talks." Jake could barely hear her. The strain was becoming too much. His nose started bleeding. "Jake," Cytherea's voice seemed far away. "You have to stop. You're dying." "Not yet," he managed to say. There was one more thing to show them, one more truth. He sent out his memories of the repair shop, of fixing things with his uncle, of making broken machines work again. He showed them that change didn't mean destruction. It meant adaptation, improvement, growth. The last thing he saw before passing out was Cytherea's face, tears falling from her silver eyes. Jake woke up 3 days later in the medical bay. Cytherea was sitting beside him, her hair gently brushing his face. "Did it work?" he asked weakly. "See for yourself," she said, pointing to the window. Imperial ships and rebel vessels floated side by side, their crews working together. On the station's main communication screen, he could see council members talking with resistance leaders. "The old empire is dead," Cytherea said softly. "We're building something new, something better." She paused. "Something human." "Theodore would be proud," Liberty said from the doorway. "Of all of us." Jake tried to sit up. "So what happens now?" Cytherea smiled. A real, warm smile. Now we fix this empire, one piece at a time." She squeezed his hand. "Together. Not because of inheritance laws, but because we choose to." "I like that plan," Jake said, smiling back. "I'd always been good at repairs." 1 year later, the repair shop in New Mexico looked very different. Solar panels shaped like crystal flowers tracked the sun, and hover cars floated next to old pickup trucks. Uncle Roger walked between them, showing the group of alien apprentices how to fix both Earth and Imperial technology. Jake watched from the office, smiling. The shop had become a symbol of the new cooperation between Earth and the Empire, a place where the best of both worlds came together. Thinking deep thoughts. Cytherea's voice echoed in his mind as she materialized beside him. Her silver hair brushed his shoulder, and he no longer flinched at her sudden appearances. "Just remembering how this all started," he said. "Right here, 1 year ago, with a weird package and an even weirder inheritance." "Speaking of inheritance," she said, "the council is ready for our presentation." Jake straightened his jacket, a compromise between Earth fashion and Imperial style that he'd grown comfortable wearing. "Let's not keep them waiting then." They stepped through the teleporter Aurora had installed, after Jake had insisted on adding safety rails, emerging in the newly rebuilt council chamber. The 13 thrones were still there, but now they formed a circle with no throne higher than the others. The council members looked different too. Some were traditional nobles, but others were former inherited spouses, Earth representatives, and even common citizens, all chosen by merit, not birth. Jake Martinez, Lady Xatheria, the first speaker said, a title now held by Liberty. Your progress report, please. Jake stepped forward, no longer intimidated by the assembly. The genetic integration program is exceeding expectations. Voluntary unions between humans and telepathic species have resulted in children with stable, enhanced abilities. More importantly, both cultures are learning from each other. Earth's creativity combined with imperial wisdom. Xatheria added, we're stronger together than apart. And the inheritance system? Liberty asked, though her smile suggested she knew the answer. Completely dismantled, Jake said proudly. Replaced with laws protecting personal freedom and choice. The last forced inheritance contract was voided this morning. A cheer went up from the council, something that would have been unthinkable in the old empire. Theodore's dream is realized, Liberty said softly. Not just reform, but true transformation. After the meeting, Jake and Xatheria returned to the repair shop. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in colors that still took her breath away. You know, Jake said, leaning against an old car, you never did tell me what you think about all this. You went from being an imperial wife to a revolutionary in 1 year. Xatheria was quiet for a moment. I think, she finally said, that being inherited by a human repair shop worker was the best thing that ever happened to me. She smiled at his surprised look. The old me would rather have died than admit that. The old you was pretty scary, Jake agreed, grinning. Watch it, human, she said, but her telepathic laugh echoed in his mind. I've been thinking about inheritance, actually. Not the old system, but what we want to pass on to the future. She took his hand, and through their telepathic connection, Jake felt her love, her hope, and a hint of something else. A tiny spark of new life, carrying both their genetic codes. Really, he whispered, we're going to be parents. She finished. Yes, the first of a new generation. Not human, not imperial, but something wonderfully in between. Jake pulled her close, thinking of how far they'd come from that first angry meeting. I love you, he said simply. I know, she replied, both out loud and in his mind. I inherited your heart after all. And that's the only inheritance that matters. Above them, Earth's sunset painted the sky in colors of both their worlds, as the first stars of evening promised an endless future of possibilities.